Good evening and welcome. My name is Omogbai, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of CAA. While we meet here today on a virtual platform, I would like to begin tonight's event by acknowledging the Munsee Lenape and Wappinger people, as well as the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. Please join me in a moment of reflection and acknowledgement. Thank you. I am thrilled that so many of you could join us this evening for CAA Then and Now Reflections on the Centennial Book and the Next Century. This evening's event is about legacies. Tonight, we celebrate the anniversary of the Centennial Book Project, The Eye, the Hand, the Mind, 100 Years of the College Art Association. The remarkable authors who contributed to the book, those who forged a path before us, our predecessors, teachers, and mentors, and the artists, designers, and scholars who have built CAA's legacy these 110 years and who will continue to do so for the next 100 years. The eye, the hand, the mind, 100 years of the College Art Association is to me one of the most important resources for understanding who we are as an organization. I've turned to this invaluable resource time and time again to understand the history of our programs and glean representative examples of how CA has evolved into the organization it is today. And for the book, Susan gathered an impressive group of authors, ranging from experts in the field to emerging professionals. I wish to recognize each of them and their respective contributions to the text, including the chapter topics. I hope this will provide context for the monumental undertaking each of these authors had to research and succinctly summarize CA's role in each of these areas. Many, many thanks to Stephen C. Whitley, who wrote the first chapter on learned societies, Susan Ball, editor of the publication and author of the second chapter on art for higher education and higher education for artists, Christine Tierney and the chapter on the 1929 to 1937 traveling exhibition program, Barry Pritzker and the chapter on CAA's cooperative relationships with museums, Craig Hauser, chapter on CAA's publications program, Julia Sienkewicz, who tackled the history of CAA annual conference, Ophelia Garcia and the history of professional development, Ellen K. Levy and contemporary CAA exhibitions, Matthew Israel, whose chapter explored pedagogy and curriculum, Christine L. Sundid and visual resources for the arts, Judy Broski, Mary D. Gerard, and Ferris Olin and their chapter on governance and diversity, Karen J. Leader's chapter on CA advocacy, and Paul B. Jascott, who wrote the conclusion on the next 100 years. Tonight, we will hear from Susan Ball, CA Executive Director Emerita, in conversation with Julia Sienkewicz, Associate Professor of Art History, Roanoke College. Afterwards, I'll discuss the future of CAA and the outlook of the field with Anne Higonnet, Professor of Art History at Barnard College. We will also discuss the legacy of the influential art historian Robert L. Herbert, who passed away last year, to whom the book was dedicated, and under whom both Anne and Susan studied at Yale. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to honor and remember Bob, a visionary art historian and teacher. He was a renowned scholar of 19th century French art. At CAA, Bob won the Frank Jowett Mather Award for the catalog of the 1962 exhibition Babizon Revisited. He also received CAA's Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award for writing on art in 2008. Bob's legacy is so much more than his scholarly production and influence on the field. He was an inspiring teacher and mentor to many, which we will learn more about this evening from Susan and Anne. Without further ado, I am excited to pass the baton to a very special pre-recorded video featuring Susan and Julia.
Greetings. I'm Julia Sienkewicz, Associate Professor of Art History at Roanoke College. And with me today is
Susan Ball. I was Executive Director of the College Art Association from 1986 to 2006, and I edited the book, The Eye, the Hand, the Mind, 100 Years of the College Art Association.
So we're going to chat about this book today, Susan, and also about your relationship with CAA over the years. In your introduction to The Eye, the Hand, and the Mind, you recollect that your relationship with CAA began in 1972, when you first became a member of the organization as a graduate student. 14 years later, in 1986, you became executive director of the organization, a role that you served in for 20 years. Of course, you have also remained active within CAA since leaving the ED position in 2006. Before we launch into other aspects of our conversation about the book, I want to celebrate your leadership in the organization and your near 50 years of dedication to CAA in various capacities. As you note in that same introduction, quote, CAA is the outcome of collaborative work, participatory governance, and an enormous commitment of time and expertise by numerous volunteers and employees. The heroes and heroines are above all the members who served in so many roles over the years, unquote. Thinking of the many years you spent working in the leadership team of the organization, would you be willing to share any recollections of moments wherein that work of collaboration and participatory governance helped the organization to reach its greatest potential?
That's a very difficult question. I mean, it's difficult because there are so many examples. But in 1986, when I began, there were only 2.5, 3 staff members. And so everything was dependent upon the volunteers. They were marvelous. But the many people that have been important to CAA have been the committee members, the board members, the staff members, the staff members, the annual conference people. It's an enormous number of people dependent on the participants, but also all the people that run it. And the publications and the mentoring as is very organized now, but it wasn't before. It was more informal. And the advocacy, it was informal too. And but all of those things are very, very important.
And thinking of your own work in the organization, Susan, which legacies do you look back at most proudly? And what do you hope arts professionals will remember about your leadership of CAA?
I think that it is very important to remember that when CAA was founded in 1911-12, it was the college art teachers split off from the Western Drawing and Manual Training Association, which is now the NAEA, the National Arts Education Association. But they were artists and art historians, and the importance of keeping those two together is not as very it has always been a creative healthy tension. I used to say it is not always creative nor healthy, but it is always tense. But they help each other and they grow together. And it was very important to maintain that. That was not always easy. The art historians in the beginning, before I came, I thought they were more important.
Mm.
There were no museum people, or very few museum people. And I think it is very important that they stay together. Paul Arnold was an artist from a Midwestern college, Oberlin, and he was the president when I started. And he was very, he didn't see, oh, he didn't see it as artists versus art historians, but artists and art historians. And so I think that is important. I also think it's very important to remember that the association is mentoring artists and art historians, and the fellowship program was very, very important. Judy Broski was present at the time, and we started the professional development work to achieve cultural diversity. Before there was people began talking about diversity, inclusion, or anything like that. And we thought that was very important.
And that was a major grant funded initiative, right, Susan, as well?
Yes, NEA and NEH Challenge Grants. We had each of them. Judy Broski wrote the NEA, and I wrote the NEH Challenge Grant. And it was a big deal, a 3-to-1 match, and we worked very hard to get that endowed in perpetuity.
What a fabulous collaboration. And also, speaking of that, joint leadership of a staff member and a board member doing that writing together.
Yeah.
The event for which we are preparing this interview is shaped around the concept of looking back and looking forward. I thought we could reflect on this a bit together by considering the generational span represented in The Eye, the Hand, the Mind. You dedicated this book to 3 key mentors: Robert Herbert, your dissertation advisor at Yale; Anne Coffin Hansen, another dissertation reader of yours, but also a CAA president, and the person who recruited you for the ED position; and Paul Arnold, the first CAA president with whom you worked at CAA. Would you like to share any memories of these 3 mentors and how they shaped your long service to the organization?
Yes, I'll start with Paul Arnold. Um, he was the president when I started. He was on the search committee that interviewed me. He was a wonderful man, a very, very good artist. And he gave me he gave me a sense of value and leadership. He was a wonderful leader. I had never, when I took the position, hadn't been an executive director before, and he was very good about nurturing and letting me know what was important. Ann Hansen, she had called me up and told me I was in Chicago uh, at their art institute, and she said, "Susan, this is a position you've got to apply for," and so I did. And she was very good. She had been present with when Rose Weil was executive director, and she knew the organization, and she was a good mentor in that sense. And Bob Herbert was always wonderful. Bob Herbert was my advisor. Bob Herbert was someone I turned to all the time. Um, he had a lot of students for a small class at Yale, but he had a lot of students, and um, they he was very supportive. I had left teaching, what the position I've been trained for, and he was very supportive.
You know, Susan, these days we talk a lot about the alt-ac career track and how graduate faculty could be more supportive of PhD recipients in pursuit of those jobs. And it's remarkable to hear you talk about Bob Herbert's support in that regard specifically, because I know not all mentors of that generation would have wanted you to pursue a career of that type.
Yes. Well, but Bob had always done curatorial work at the same time as teaching. So he knew there was something outside the academy. Um, he had taught, always taught, but he also was a very important curator. And that was a start. And he also thought that I was a good administrator, and I didn't know I was a good administrator. But both Bob and Ann wanted someone that they knew that was a scholar they respected leading the College Art Association.
Now, with respect to the eye, the hand, the mind, the generational span of the book was deliberate, as I understand it. Some contributions to the book were written by renowned and established scholars, but others were the first major works of advanced graduate students. What balance were you seeking when you decided to solicit this variety of authors? What do you think this variety of professional stages and perspectives brought to the volume?
It was not planned at first. The whole thing wasn't planned. I was going to write the whole book, but I came up with a complex structure, and I knew that I couldn't do it in the amount of time I had, and so I thought I would get other people and use them with a variety of ages and expertise. But the graduate students, that was the advice I got from a friend of mine, a former board member, Jonathan Feinberg. You know him. And he said, advanced graduate students can do a research paper quickly. They need publications. They're just starting their careers, and you'll get really good people. So I 5 of the authors were the next generation. 2 of them I knew well. They were former staff members, and 3 of them were recommended by board members and friends. The Craig Hauser had been in the publications department of CAA, and he was currently a graduate student, and he wrote on CAA's publications. Matthew Israel was a graduate student, and he wrote on the education. Karen Leader was a graduate student, and I had asked Ken Silver, a professor at NYU. I told him I wanted someone who could write on advocacy and who would take a difficult subject and be tough. And Jonathan Feinberg recommended you as someone who would be perfect for writing about the conference. And Kristen Tierney had been a staff member at CAA. She was a graduate student, and she wrote on the exhibitions, CAA's series of very important College Art Association exhibitions in the 1930s and 40s that was the New York WPA. And she went on to become a very important gallerist, but with a scholarly viewpoint. So it's very good. 3 of the people have tenure, and they were just, as you know, graduate students at the time. It was really nice.
Susan, certainly for me on this theme of looking back and looking forward, those of us who were at that graduate student stage are now, as you've just mentioned, sort of early mid-career, having established ourselves in different areas. And I know that the contribution to the volume inspired us each in different ways. Craig, who went on to write his whole dissertation on that topic. In my case, committee service for the organization for quite a number of years, and then a board term that I've just completed. And Karen was recently roped into coming on as a committee chair for our new services to historians of the Visual Arts Committee. So certainly, at least for those 3, the relationship to the organization and this book has had a really long-standing impact for the last decade, of our work.
It was great. It was really great having the young students, bringing them into the association that way and getting their point of view. And the conference and the advocacy and publications were 3 of the most important chapters.
Now let's talk a little bit about the senior authors you brought in and those relationships.
Well, there were 7 board members, 4 current or former board members, and 3 presidents. Judy Broski and Faye Garcia. Judy Broski had been president. Mary Garrard, a very important feminist author and historian. Paul Jaskett and Ellen Levy, an artist. Ferris Olin and Christine Sant of Visual Resources curator. They were all wrote about their specialty, and they offered insight and experience too. And there were and then one constant ally, Stephen Wheatley, who was the vice president of the American Council of Learned Societies.
You chose to organize the eye, the hand, the mind around the 16 purposes of the organization, which were ratified unanimously by the board of directors in 1963. These purposes have remained surprisingly durable, despite the many subsequent changes in the organization. What led you to use these purposes as the backbone of the volume? What were you hoping to achieve by structuring the book in this way? And were there any surprises for you in how this structure played out in the completed volume?
When I was going to do the history, and I was trying to come up with the rationale that made sense. It wasn't just in 1911 this happened, in 1912 that happened, I wanted to. I came up with this structure of having it be the purposes, and the purposes were major things like the publications, annual conference, mentorship, and also a lot of other things. The dealing with other organizations and advocacy.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to have introduced Anne, who, like Susan, studied under Bob as well at Yale. And so, Anne, perhaps you can introduce yourself a little bit and give us some insight of your connection to Bob.
Well, I was a Bob Herbert student after the first great heroic wave of students, and sort of in the middle before the great last batch. I guess that makes me like a pivot kind of figure. So I think what I gleaned just from being in that position was how much Bob truly admired all of his students. He was constantly telling me how great the students were who had come before me, which of course made me feel I could never live up to their bar. But I think what's so amazing about Bob in terms of our topic today, which is change, is that Bob was completely committed to a very traditional academic ideal, the originality of scholarship. He really believed in archival research and in an argument. But what made him so different from other people was that for him, that was not just about his own work, but it was about how if he saw the originality in each of his students, they would push the field forward in a way that he didn't even anticipate, but he just believed in. And he was so committed to the field changing that he took risks on each and every one of us.
I have to agree with Judy, who I see in the charts, who says it was wonderful to hear Susan and Julia about this very important oral history. And your comment, Anne, about his embrace of change is so timely, given the amazing, incredible, or any way you describe it, what we've been through this nearly 2 years and what that represents for CAA, living up to its history and looking forward to a future of that change. Now, you are in the academy, so I really would love to hear your sense in the trenches, as it were, about what you think that future holds.
Well, Susan's book timing was brilliant because somehow, or maybe it's art history's timing is brilliant because right after our first century, we've embarked on the biggest change this field has ever known because it's happening in three ways simultaneously. We want a very different kind of faculty than we used to, one which is much more diverse and inclusive. We're radically changing the subjects that we study, and we're also radically changing the medium in which we work. We still publish books, but we all know that we have to adapt to not only publishing online and collaborating with museum colleagues who do so much of their work online, but we've also had to, in a horrible, desperate rush, learn to teach online.
Mm-hmm. Learned societies survive because members unite over a sense of solidarity with their colleagues and with the aim of advancing knowledge in their fields. And I feel like that is an encapsulation of CAA, bringing together art history, and the practice of it. In so many ways, hearing Susan and Julia's conversation and what you do in the classroom come in full circle with what CAA is about.
Well, in a way, you could think of CAA as a kind of institutional meta Bob Herbert, because the vocation of CAA is to foster the individuality of all its members through advancing the originality of all of their scholarship and their artwork and also their pedagogy. But it also, in the same way that part of what Bob's teaching was about was creating a network of students and making each of his students accountable to all the others. CAA picks up the causes that we believe in, but we just would never be able to advance each and every one of us because, we're also at a time of tremendous institutional change, where every school is calling itself and its audiences and its policies into question. And the CAA is what's going to help art historians and artists and curators navigate the shoals of those institutional changes.
Well, one of the many lessons I personally have learned, as I said in my introductory comments, I have referred to this book so many times to get perspective of the history, the legacy, and how this helps in so many ways underscore the role of CAA in this emerging landscape you describe of and also mentioned in the conversation between Susan and Julia about these alternative careers outside of the academy. And to your point, the shrinking tenureships and what this means, this rapidly changing pedagogic crisis. Resistance we see everywhere to this change, even though we all know that life is change and we are going to be encountering this no matter where we turn. So, what's your sense, in dealing with this change, building on Bob's legacy of embracing that change and in so many ways even being ahead of that change?
Well, I think that part of what Bob did for all his students was to make them feel safe enough to do a lot of innovation. And since we're at a moment at which the most fundamental things about our field, like what is a book? What is an essay? Who is our audience? What does it mean to introduce the history of art to students? Every single thing that we thought was foundational about our careers is now changing in terms of subject and in terms of form. And no one of us can reinvent any of those things by ourselves. It's going to take, there's this, it's a fashionable term now, but hive mind. We are sort of like bees. None of us is going to be able all by ourselves to reinvent the introduction to our field, which we have to do, because otherwise our majors will shrink down to zero.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to let go of the book. It's scary to say, what is the difference between a book and a sustained long form argument? Are they necessarily the same thing? What does it mean to relinquish authority in the classroom? We were all trained to be the authority in the classroom. And I think what we learned last year is actually we're not. We can't be. We have to, in so many ways, reshape our relationship to our students. And to do that, we need all the help we can get from each other.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I suppose we do need to acknowledge we've all been through the ringer. In a way, there's some comfort in knowing that we all experienced it together, and we'll have to work our way through it and figure out what this means. And, but I always look back each time to over this 100 years in reading the book, how CAA has constantly responded to each challenge, coming up with so many ways of surviving, thriving, and responding to the times. And so when I look at that, I feel palpable excitement at the potential of the outcome of this unique opportunity for collaboration at this moment in time, as the humanities evolve, and the role that arts can play, and CAA in particular can play in this evolution.
Well, the CAA conference was always a great wellspring. Especially when one is young, one goes to the CAA to get lots of ideas of what to teach, and then gradually there have been more and more panels about how to teach, and so the conference has also become a great wellspring of ideas about how we can change our classes and what completely new kinds of subjects we might consider teaching. And it's so important to pay attention to what each of our departments does, but it's also so important to go back to the CAA to get a larger perspective, and then sometimes to come back to our departments and suggest a few scary changes based on what we've been hearing from colleagues. And also, I will say right now, yes, if anyone has any smart ideas about the intro, the book, the classroom, I would be thrilled to hear them. Questions are great. Ideas for exactly how we might want to change, great too.
Well, I hope our audience will send in questions, and because that would be great for us to hear. But along the same lines of the legacies of Bob, and the founding of CAA. One of the things for me is seeing at the turn of the century when CAA was founded in a field that was male dominated, and coming lo, this over a century later, we have so many females. And it's amazing that next year we've come full circle. It's the 50th anniversary of feminism, the role that CAA played in feminism, and the creation of the committee on that. So, in so many ways, it's amazing that we are able to learn from our history and celebrate the changes that have been occurring and the role, the leadership role that CAA has consistently played. With one example being this 50th celebration of CAA's role in the feminism movement. So I think that is wonderful. And I look forward to ongoing opportunities, to have further conversations about this, about our legacy, um, and the roles that we all play in today's world. And one of the challenges, I think, just as CA played that role in feminism, I hope that we will be in a position to do something similar with the climate crisis. Um, as you know, the climate crisis, we have it now in the second year of the program areas for the conference. And I can't wait to see the incredible work that will be the outcome of all of this effort and incredible scholarship that's coming in through this climate crisis. Um, it would be nice if we could get some questions from the audience, because I know you and I can keep having this conversation by ourselves, and we are going to do a whole lot more about that. So, what's your sense in looking at contemporary issues as a lens to learning from our legacy, our history, and the contributions of Bob?
Okay, well, look, that actually gets to what sometimes seems like the strangest thing about the CAA, which is that it has both artists in it and art historians. And part of the tension, it's the tension between studio and academics. But in the past, I think the tension was also between how necessarily studio colleagues are contemporary artists and art historians work about the past. But if one of the prime principles of teaching is to meet students where they are, which I think is one of the prime principles of teaching, then our studio colleagues or the people we meet at CAA who are artists, or the panels that are organized about art, have become more essential than ever, because our students are in a very, very contemporary art moment, for reasons that I don't need to tell anyone tonight about. Our students are living in the present, and it's the attention to contemporary art and the issues of contemporary art that the CAA reminds us of all the time, if we're historians and curators, is the fastest way to meet our students where they are, through contemporary art.
Well, it looks like we got a question. A question came in through, I think, was it email? I think I read a question just came in, and who asks The eye, the hand, the mind offered a great opportunity for graduate students like Julia to publish and work with experienced art historians like Susan. What advice would you give to PhD students today who are looking for publishing and mentorship?
Okay, well, that was a brilliant insight of Jonathan Feinberg's, that graduate students have the time to do things that older scholars don't. And also, many of them have digital skills. And my advice to a graduate student or a very young scholar would be to ask an older scholar what project they would like to work on, which they feel is too much time or too complicated or too digital for them to accomplish on their own. And almost always the older scholar will come out with a torrent of pent up projects. And in a way, what the younger graduate student or colleague has to offer is the bribe of digital know-how. There are many collective projects that have multiple parts to them, which have to be done by separate people. And they can be tremendously rewarded. I did one, I've done two with graduate students, and they were both digital. And to my amazement, I discovered that it was actually way more fun to organize and edit many graduate students' work than it was to do something on my own, because I felt like I was the recipient of all of their energies. So this is where digital publishing is a really good opportunity, and it's really amazing how few digital views it takes to equal the readership of your average academic book these days. So it's actually a very good form of publishing and getting known.
Well, I was struck by Susan's comments when she said that Bob encouraged her leaving academia to head CAA. And we are seeing more and more today of folks leaving the academy for work in all other areas, in corporate, nonprofits, and the like. And we've been doing a lot of surveys at CAA, extracting quantitative engagement information as well as qualitative surveys, hearing from members. And as we reposition, we are building the technological and digital infrastructure, to your point, and about one of the major advantages of working with students today, absorbing that energy they bring to it, that creativity, especially when it's based on the digital know-how. Well, it's given us an opportunity and potentially will give CAA a whole lot more to be able to have analytical data of how folks engage with CAA as we reposition for the 21st century to service the needs of all of these emerging scholars going into these alternative careers and being of service in whichever aspects of the world career tracks they choose to engage in. But one of the things that you have indicated also was Bob's legacy of intersectionality. It seems to me that that was, a precursor to what we're seeing today, how many years ago. So what would you say to the young graduate now who is considering career options, which I think perhaps at the time, as Susan indicated, she said, "Are you sure I can do this?"
Yeah, well, at the moment when Bob was so openly presenting his students with the intellectual, not just the money making, but the intellectual advantages of both curatorial and academic careers, because he himself would go back and forth between being a curator and a publishing scholar. He was at the end of a world, I would say, in which those roles were, each of them, pretty well defined. So if you think now about what does it mean to go beyond academia, it's not just about whether you're going to hop over to the museum world or not. It's about realizing that even though we don't like to think of it, the academic world has much more porous boundaries than it used to, because we can't just put ourselves between book covers and ignore media, social media, or what goes on online. And museums are not a closed world either. They have so many porous boundaries with so many other forms of knowledge production and knowledge diffusion. And so I think one of our big challenges is to try to understand what are the first principles of what we're trying to do. Like, rather than endlessly fret over, has someone published a book or has someone not published a book? I think we need to think, what is it exactly about the long form argument that we still think is important? What does it mean to train someone to be able to do long form arguments as opposed to getting out something that looks like the physical object, the book? What does it mean to do an exhibition? What does it mean to curate a collection? We're being asked to go way upstream of what most of us were trained to assume. And I'll just give one teaching example. You know, when Bob was training me, even though he was so ahead of his time, I think if I had told Bob, you know, Bob, I think a Nike sneaker is maybe a work of art, I think he would have blanched. But then, you know, he would have paused and said, oh, well, you know, explain to me why. But we are in a moment in which we don't have these nice little boundaries of painting, sculpture, and architecture around us. We need to open up academia to the world around us so that there are many, many more careers outside of an art history teaching faculty for our students by setting the pace, by opening up what we mean by art. And that is, yes, a very intersectional thing. You know, we have to stop assuming any of the quality criteria that we used to take for granted. All the old hierarchies are very suspect now, for good reason.
Well, I know, and you and I can continue this conversation for a long time. But there's so many interesting questions coming in, both on the chat and online. And this tells me we need to continue to have these conversations, and we need to find a way to have another forum to continue. And for the many questions we are unable to, I count at least 4 questions that we are not going to be able to get to tonight. Within the time allotted to us. We've practically run out of time, frankly. So we are going to do our best to try to answer these questions some way, somehow. And so, but I do want to thank you, Anne, for this conversation. This tells me that CAA, with our legacy of responsiveness to the changing times and changing environment, I look with excitement to unfolding and rolling out the many things we are working on now to make that possible in response to the needs of our members and to the field at large. And so our conversation will continue. Thank you so much, Anne. And I know we'll have another opportunity to talk some more. Um, so that was quite a discussion about the future of our field. And I would like to take this opportunity now to reflect on the future of CAA itself. Um, so thanks, Anne, for this opportunity to have this conversation and to be continued. And so for all of those whose questions we've been unable to get to, I hope you will hang in there and we'll do our best to find some way to continue to answer these questions and other opportunities for further discussion. Thanks, Anne. And now I would like to thank all of you that have contributed to this and Bob's legacy and giving us an opportunity to continue to have this conversation. One of the questions here, though, that let's see if I can read out this one that says, what have you seen as an artist? See, I can barely read this stuff now. Biggest effect of influence on the development and direction of the work of artists based on their relationship with their art historian colleagues.
What I could give a super short stab at that. We're at a moment where we're really looking at art to address the issues of change at the level of content more than of form, I would say at this point. And it's possible for art historians to, in a way, put contemporary art up front and ask in a modest way, what issues does contemporary art pose now? And take our cue from that.
Thank you. And I do really, I find myself drawn away to all of these incredible questions, but I think I have to end now because it's depend on where you are. We made a commitment to an hour, so I think we should honor that. Thanks so much, Anne, for sharing this insight and in this conversation, Bob's legacy and the future of our field. And I'm delighted of the relationship between all of you that who were influenced by and mentored by and taught by Bob, and that relationship with CAA. It has enriched our lives in so many ways. And I believe I'm fortunate to actually be able to speak with some of you, not just reading about it in the book. So thank you. And so with over a century of service to the field, it is more important than ever that CAA finds new and innovative ways to continue its work, advocating for the individuals and institutions who make up our membership and have a stake in our work. CAA's new strategic repositioning is designed to bridge history and scholarship with the accessibility affordances of digital technology in order to better service all segments of our constituency, especially underserved areas. We're excited to offer more content, networking opportunities, and launch innovative approaches to support the field during this challenging time. No matter your discipline, we have a vital mission to promote and serve the visual arts and their understanding through intellectual engagement, commitment to the diversity of the visual arts, and that means serving those who study, teach, write about, and make that art. As part of our commitment to virtual programming and in celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the Eye, the Hand, the Mind, 100 years of the College Art Association, I'm excited to announce that some of the book's authors have agreed to film short videos reflecting on their chapters and how the topics have evolved over the past 10 years. Keep a lookout in your email over the next 2 months for CAA's weekly newsletter, where you can see Karen J. Leader discussing Chapter 12, CAA Advocacy, the Nexus of Art and Politics. Judy K. Broski, Ferris Erling, and Mary Gerard discussing their contributions to Chapter 11, Governance and Diversity. Ellen K. Levy discussing Chapter 8, Art in an Academic Setting, Contemporary CA Exhibitions. And Craig Hauser reflecting on Chapter 5, The Changing Face of Scholarly Publishing, CA's Publications Program. To our viewers, members, donors, and participants this evening, I hope you know how much we value your dedication and commitment to CAA. I hope you might consider making a contribution to the association, either through a direct donation or by joining our Legacy Society. The Legacy Society recognizes members and friends who demonstrate their deep commitment to visual arts by making a planned gift or including CAA in their estate plans. Through their foresight and generosity, these remarkable individuals play a significant role in establishing a sound foundation for the association, ensuring our longevity and future success. To learn more about our legacy giving, please reach out to development@collegeart.org. Thank you again for your friendship and commitment to CAA. I hope you all have a terrific rest of this evening. Thanks, and thank you for coming. Bye.